No one imagines when they are exchanging marriage vows with their beloved that they are going to be among the approximately 50% of married people who find themselves getting a divorce. No one imagines in the early days of falling in love that this new life-changing relationship will end in a breakup. I was no exception. But 16 years into my marriage, after 3 years of couples counseling trying unsuccessfully to address the core issues, I was finally ready to begin to consider the idea of a divorce. So throughout this sermon, I'll often refer to divorce, but it could be substituted with any kind of breakup or ending as well. The resistance in my soul to the very idea of divorce was substantial. It was so big, in fact, that at first I couldn't even utter the word inside the silence of my own mind, much less out loud. To begin with, I was married to a woman. Do you know how hard same-gender loving people work to have the right to marry? Contemplating divorce seemed like a betrayal to my people. Second, I'm a UU minister, and in case you hadn't noticed, UUs are big on covenants. Contemplating breaking my marriage covenant seemed like it might undermine my ability to carry out my profession, if not unravel my faith. Third, at the time, I was serving a church as the associate minister for faith development, and the congregation was quite attached to my family as a whole. We had even played Mary, Joseph, Baby Jesus, and a star in the no rehearsal Christmas pageant 1 week after my youngest was born, something that people still talked about years later. What would it mean for my congregation for us to get divorced? And fourth, my family was living in a small co-housing community with 3 families, all sharing one property, and we functioned in some ways as an extended family, sharing birthdays and many holidays. And in fact, we were all UUs and we had a covenant. And that covenant declared that our intention was to live that way for the rest of our lives, something that none of us had been bold enough to put in our marriage covenants. But divorce was not really a possibility we had contemplated, and it would certainly disrupt the whole system. And finally, there were our children. Like most parents, the last thing I wanted to do was anything that would harm them, and I knew on some level that divorce would shatter their world. So what did I do? As is the tradition in my family, when wanting to learn how to do something we don't know how to do, I went to the library. My parents had built several additions onto our home, mostly learning how to do it themselves through books they had checked out from the library. So if the library could help them build a house, maybe it could help me figure out how to end my marriage with dignity and compassion. The library did not disappoint, and I came home with several books that helped me wrap my mind and heart. I'm dating myself, right? I went to look for books, but that's okay. About what I knew was going to happen to my family. And one book stuck out above the rest, and that was Catherine Woodward Thomas's Conscious Uncoupling, 5 Steps to Living Happily Even After. In this practical and heartfelt book, the author sets out a moral framework for divorce that allows everyone to come through the process healthy and whole. That book was my guiding light as I dug deep and got brave and charted a course through the tidal wave of resistance towards divorce. So I'm curious about something, and if you'd be willing to help me out, I don't want you to out yourself in any way you're not comfortable, but if you're willing to share, I'm going to ask a few questions, and if your answer is in the affirmative, if you could just raise your hand. How many of you have someone in your immediate family, birth or chosen, who has married? How many of you have someone in your immediately family who has divorced? How many of you have experienced breakups of relationships that were painful or disorienting? Yeah. How many of you recall listening to a sermon that dealt with commitment, covenant, or marriage? How many of you recall listening to a sermon that addressed divorce or dissolution of a covenant? How many of you have attended a wedding or commitment ceremony connected to this congregation? Yeah. How many of you have attended a divorce or uncoupling ritual connected to this congregation? Okay, thank you. That's about what I expected, but I wasn't sure, so I appreciate you being willing to share. As a religious community, I believe UUs have some room for improvement in how we offer support, education, and rituals regarding the reality of divorce in our lives and in the lives of our loved ones. Just as the teens in our congregation go out to be peer educators around relationships and sexuality because they've been through the Our Whole Lives Sexuality and Relationship Education program, I think UU congregations could empower people to be ambassadors in their families and workplaces and communities about a way to break up that is healing, kind, loving, and respectful for all involved. I believe our congregations could be places that could provide support in community, allowing both parties in a breakup to keep their church home, and for the children of divorced people to experience an expanded family that continues to hold them in love. It's a tangible way of putting our UU values into action in the world. So let me share with you a brief overview of Divorce 101. I did not know this when I first headed to the library. Lurking in the shadows of my mind were stories of acrimonious divorces that would permanently harm my children. What I learned was that divorce can indeed cause strong emotions and impulses driven by our reptilian brain, and that if handled poorly, it can cause harm to everyone involved. But it doesn't have to be that way. You see, our understanding of marriage in this country has evolved dramatically over the last 150 to 200 years. In addition to partnership in the practical matters of work, we seek emotional connection and intimacy, personal growth and support in our marriages in ways that were not commonplace in prior centuries. But the hardwired biology of marriage or any long-term partnership is still the same as the pair bonding of humans when our species had much shorter lifespans, and happily ever after commonly ended at age 40 or so when someone died. Our biology has not caught up with the new reality of longer lifespans and more complicated expectations for marriage. Once bonded, nature does not want us to come apart. And when it does, our nervous systems are on high alert. Our reptilian brain gets involved with all the fight, flight, or freeze responses of an animal under survival threat. We can feel as though we're going to die, or that our soul is homeless and completely unmoored. It's not uncommon for people to experience intense waves of otherwise unfamiliar emotions in a breakup, like hatred, rage, or a desire for revenge and retaliation. Active hate is another way to stay bonded, which can account for this seemingly mysterious flip from soul mate to soul hate. With survival fears kicked up, destructive dynamics can play out in negotiations around things like property or belongings. On top of that, divorce is registered in our bodies right up there with the loss of, like a death. The loss of home, familiar routines, familiar habits, smells. Sometimes there's a loss of extended family or community or some cherished activities in social circles. And if children are involved, there's inevitably a loss of some time spent with them. There's the loss of the dream of what was supposed to be, and on some level, a loss of identity. And grief has its own overwhelming impacts on the body, mind, and spirit. So it's easy to see why divorce can be such a treacherous path to travel. But fortunately, we don't have to let reactivity and the inevitable emotional storm of breakup guide our actions. With intentionality and guided by such values as the respect for the inherent worth and dignity of every person that most UUs hold dear, Anyone whose heart has been wounded at the very center by a breakup can consciously complete that process, heal their heart, move through the disorientation, pain, and grief, and live without overwhelming sadness, learning to love and trust again. Families can expand to include new members and new constellations. Dr. Constance Ahrens, in her pioneering book, The Good Divorce, Keeping Your Family Together When Your Marriage Comes Apart, speaks of binuclear families that are created after divorce. Study after study confirms what many of us know from experience. It's not divorce itself that harms children. It's conflict, tension, or being used as a pawn between fiery foes that cause harm to children. Ahrens writes, in good divorces, couples part without destroying the lives of those they love. Their children continue to have two parents. The divorced parents continue to have good relationships with their children. The families of these good divorces continue to be just that, families. So how do people in the midst of one of the most painful experiences of being human manage to wrangle the reptilian brain and engage instead in conscious uncoupling? In her book, Catherine Woodward Thomas expands on 5 steps to conscious uncoupling. And I'll explain them briefly here, but if you know someone going through a breakup or divorce, I do recommend gifting them the whole book. Step 1 is find emotional freedom. This step teaches people to name, contain, and hold the strong emotions from a deeper center within themselves. There is no discouragement from having the strong feelings. Arise, they will. For example, someone seething with anger might wake up to the fact that they deserve to be treated better. Once emotions are held and honored and used for their power to wake us up, they can relinquish the driver's seat. Then people can develop the capacity to consciously choose their actions in line with their values and with integrity. Step 2 is to reclaim your power and your life. The breakdown of a breakup is fertile ground for being able to see patterns that haven't served us well. This step inspires people to take empowered self-responsibility. By learning to ask generative questions of themselves, people begin to see things like how they were giving their power away, or what motivated them to show up in ways that enabled toxic patterns in their relationship, or where they minimized red flags or failed to presence their own feelings and needs. Even in a situation where the breakup is 97% the other person's awful behavior, conscious uncoupling encourages people to get curious about that 3%, their own 3%. And from there, they can make amends, sometimes to another, but often to themselves, by committing to do it differently moving forward. And this will often require developing new capacities and skills. For me, this was one of the most powerful steps. Once I saw clearly how I put the needs of my whole family system above my own, and how I had essentially abandoned myself and stopped communicating my true feelings and needs in my relationship, I committed not to ever do that again. I realized I would need to grow my capacity to tolerate disequilibrium in relationships to stay true to myself, as well as nurture my ability to actually recognize my own feelings and needs and desires so that I could communicate them with others. I would also need to learn to set boundaries that prioritized them. It's an ongoing practice for me, but I can already see how it's paying off in greater health in my own family system and in all of my relationships. The third step is to break the pattern and heal your heart. And this step is a deep dive into the beliefs and stories that people have created for themselves in relation to things that happened when they were very young. The ways of relating that people created as a young person for their survival are designed to keep us in that old story. And this is right on the surface in a breakup. These false stories live in our bodies. They are often things like, I'm invisible, or I'm not lovable, or I'm not enough. Left to run their natural course, we go about life accumulating evidence to confirm these stories. So this third step helps us to identify, deconstruct, and challenge these false stories and begin to mentor ourselves to align with a deeper truth. Truths such as, I'm a gift of the universe, loved by all life. I'm worthy beyond measure. Or I'm a powerful, visible presence in the world, here to have an impact. From there, people can develop new skills and practices relating in new ways that may feel uncomfortable at first, but ultimately will generate evidence in the world for a new story, for the deeper truth of who they really are. Step 4 is named playfully, become a love alchemist. From the stronger center of identity established in the last step, people now articulate an intention for the future of their relationship with their former partner. Practices of generosity and forgiveness, opportunities to create closure and cohesion, and new communication guidelines with one's former partner all come into play in this step. Having graduated from the old patterns and ways of being, step 4 begins to chart a new course into future possibilities. Finally, step 5, create your happily even after life. In this step, people name new agreements about relationships appropriate to their new form. Often the new relationship is friendly, but more formal. While some couples can emerge as friends, that is a high bar and not for everyone. Some people engage in a conscious uncoupling ritual during this step. People explore future structures for housing, parenting, and finances, seeking win-win solutions. At this stage, a mediator or lawyer is often engaged to help deal with the legal processes and details of the financial separation. Realistically, most people experience a financial dip for at least 2 to 3 years after a divorce. So in this step, the focus is on the well-being of everyone rather than on personal financial gain for any one person. All parties make commitments to speak well of the other person publicly and to not divide their shared communities or pull on people to pick sides. My former spouse and I sought support from a UU minister, a colleague of mine, to facilitate a conscious uncoupling ritual. We spoke with her about our intentions for being co-parents together and how we wanted to treat each other in the months and years ahead. During the ritual, we gathered our co-housing community as witnesses. We took off our wedding rings and spoke of the many gifts and blessings of our time as married partners. We released our marriage covenant and entered into a co-parenting covenant because we're good UUs. It was both beautiful and painful. One of our teens ran from the room partway through the ritual. The pain was too much for him to hold in that moment. But the ritual named a new truth that was important for all of us to integrate, both our family and our community. Only 4 months after that ritual, life threw something unexpected our way. My former partner was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Since we were all still in the midst of COVID lockdowns, I agreed to honor her request to move back into our home full-time to care for our children while she died. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Every cell in my body wanted separation from the person I was in the process of divorcing. And yet I was tied back into a daily proximity that was excruciating. I was facing the death of my children's other mother, my spouse of 16 years, and all the grief that that entailed. We were again co-parenting in the same house, only this time the canvas was actually life and death. It took everything I had and then some to uphold our co-parenting covenant and our respectful communication guidelines. Especially in that crucible, conscious uncoupling process was a blessing. To my great surprise, one day, some months before she died, my former partner thanked me for initiating our divorce. She said she wouldn't have had the courage, and it was absolutely the right thing. In her journey of living with and dying from cancer, she learned to let herself be loved, and in fact, felt lovable for the first time in her life. This might not have happened had we stayed married. Several days before she passed, she gave me her complete trust as the parent of our 2 teenagers and blessed my future happiness with another partner. I will be forever grateful that conscious uncoupling created a container for us to hold our separation well, even under such extreme circumstances. And then life threw something else unexpected our way. Divorce, cancer, COVID, and death turned out to be too much for our co-housing community to hold well. Despite all of us doing the best we could, and we all did the best we could, relationships strained and ruptured. I eventually moved out of the community with my teens. We now live down the block in our own home where we reconstituted as a family of 3. I went through all the conscious uncoupling steps all over again as I trained to become a coach, only this time my focus was on a breakup of sorts with my community. I learned from the losses and disappointments. I let the pain break open my heart again and move me into yet more growth. I took responsibility for my part. I made amends to myself, and I'm still considering what amends I might need to make to others. I reinforced commitments about how I will show up in all my relationships moving forward. I'm happy to say, woven into the long grief journey, warmth and laughter are returning to my home. My teens are doing well. I have a new healthy love in my life that amazes me every day. I'm still sorting out the ways I interact with the other families in the co-housing community. For now, we're cordial neighbors, friendly when we see each other, but more formal and distant than when our lives were intertwined day to day. My children come and go from the community and are held in their loving embrace. They'll be with them for winter solstice, walking a spiral of pine boughs and candles, setting intentions for the new year as they have every winter for their whole lives. I will be celebrating elsewhere with my new partner, and we have created a new ritual for ourselves. These patterns of our family life have stretched to accommodate the new reality of our changing relationships. So my journey is an unusual one, but the point I want to make clear this morning is this. Breakups, separations, divorces happen between individuals and communities. For many people, enduring the excruciating pain of an ending is better than spending years in the ongoing pain of a bad marriage or partnership or being intertwined in a community that no longer fits. As a religious community, we can offer education and support on how to part ways in respectful, healthy, and growthful ways with everyone's well-being in mind, especially our children's. Can you imagine this congregation gathering to honor the ending of a relationship or marriage, and when there's children involved, blessing a new co-parenting covenant. I can see it. Can you imagine embracing both parties in a divorce in those awful, disorienting early weeks and months, validating and helping to contain the sometimes overwhelming emotions without needing the stories to line up, and also without taking sides? Can you imagine gently encouraging people to leave behind blame and victimized thinking and take responsibility for the way they want to live? Let us allow our UU values to infuse not only celebrations of commitment and the creation of covenants, but also the endings and letting go of covenants. This is how we grow consciousness on planet Earth, how we grow our capacity to honor and love one another. We do this for our grandchildren's grandchildren in celebration and care of all beings. So be it. Amen and blessed be.